Good day to all of you, Reverend Father Gerardo Salise, to all my classmates. I will be reporting the pontificate of Innocent III to Boniface VIII. So, the pontificate of Innocent III. The development which had begun with Gregory VII led the papacy under Innocent III to the zenith of its power. With the pontificate of Innocent III, the papacy achieved a dizzying and untenable height. It was no longer the emperor, but unequivocally the pope, who now was acknowledged as the supreme arbiter of the Western Christianity. Also, back then it was the emperor, but now the pope is recognized and acknowledged as the supreme arbiter of the Western Christianity. Europe experienced an abrupt change of scene in 1187, when Emperor Henry VI suddenly died at the age of 32. So he died at a very young age and left behind him the construction of a powerful empire. So he died while constructing a powerful empire and left behind him a 2-year-old son, Frederick II, as heir. So it's very destructive for the empire because the rightful heir, is too young to succeed him. So a few months later in Rome, the senile Celestine III was followed by the energetic 37-year-old Innocent III, the most powerful and perhaps the most influential pope in the Middle Ages. In Germany, struggles over the succession broke out and the empire began to break down. At this very moment, the papacy was able to fortify its primatial position in the whole Western Church and to exert a central commanding and guiding authority. So the Pope has the power to guide the falling kingdom because he is the head of all of the Western Christianity. All that Gregorian reform was striven for and Gregory VII had demanded in his Dictatus Papae was realized under Innocent III. A supreme legislator, judge, and administrator, he fully possessed the plenitudo potestatis and exercised this wealth of power with sovereign assurance over the whole church. But since this church was one with Western Christianity, the political destinies of the people could not remain unaffected by its increase in authority. So, the destinies of the people, the political destinies, cannot remain unaffected because almost all of the Western people are Christians. So they have one head. So it will never be, it could never remain unaffected. The Augustinian idea of the city of God, together with the donation of Constantine, which was regarded as genuine, allowed the Church to appear as the true Imperium Romanum and to develop the idea of papal world domination. This concept was deeply rooted in the religious and political thought of the age, and also stemmed from the Christian responsibility which a reformed papacy felt for Western Christianity. So the Populus Christianus, or the Christian peoples in English, of the West was the supernatural and therefore also supranational community of Christians. The Pope as Caput Christianitatis, or in English, the head of all Christians, therefore automatically became the head and guide of the Western world, which, though consisting of many peoples, was united in the same faith. Even though they are they have different they belong to different kingdoms on empires, they are united with the same faith, and therefore they have the same head, the Pope. So, who really is Innocent the Third? The picture which modern research has drawn of Innocent the Third shows him as a deeply religious, inwardly pious, and ascetically severe man who, although a born ruler and imperator, was a priest and pastor of the first rank. As vicar of Christ, Innocent administered in his office solely in the knowledge of his responsibility to God. And since that time, Vicarius Christi has been one of the titles carried by the Pope. Vicarius Christi, the Vicar of Christ. So, as the Vicar of Christ, his pontificate must be aligned to God, to Christ. So, his original name is Lothar of Signy. He was born in 1186 into an ancient family of counts. He studied theology and canon law in Paris and Bologna and became a member of College of Cardinals during the papacy of his uncle Clement III. Small and frail of figure and in delicate health, Innocent combined a comprehensive knowledge with a towering intellect, acuteness and shrewdness and moderation. Huh? Above all, he gave lofty spiritual interpretation of the office of a universal papacy. Far from being an ecclesiastical pope or fanatic or a purely political pope as what they have said, no, because he is purely and deeply religious, inwardly pious, and ascetically severe man. Innocent actually showed a great openness to all the problems of the age, which had failed with cultural, political, social, and religious tensions and contrasts. Though internal consistency and strength, he forced the many diverse tendencies to conform to a uniform principle of order, which, in the light of time, could only be papal order. Innocent and the Staufen Empire. If Innocent the Third interfered with secular matters, he did so out of responsibility and the conviction that all things in the world must submit to God's order, and that even kings and princes are subjects to God's judgment. Hmm? So, the world appeared to Innocent as a hierarchia, or as a holy arrangement. The fine distinction between the purely political and purely spiritual, or between church and state, or in other words, dualism, had not been so refined that overlapping and infringement could be avoided. Rationale peccati, the Pope always felt justified and even obliged to intervene wherever order was disturbed through moral guilt or objective injustice. Thus, as caput Christianitatis, he also must be an arbiter mundi in all pending issues. Arbiter mundi, or arbiter of the whole world. For these reasons, Innocent intervened in the German struggle for the throne after the double election in 1198. So there happened was a double election in 1198. So he intervened. He did not claim for himself the approbation of the election itself, but merely the judgment of the moral qualities of the candidate. As the Pope, he must select a morally rightful man. At first, he rejected the Staufen Philip of Swabia because he considered him to be a violent man and regarded the Staufic concept of uniting Lower Italy and Sicily with the empire as reprehensible and dangerous as well as illegal. However, when Philip, after his victory over the anti-king Otto IV, turned out to be a moderate man, no, and gave guarantees with respect to his Sicilian policy, Innocent was immediately willing to conclude peace with him. So when Innocent III realized that he was a moderate man, so he uh, gave peace with Philip of Swabia. Innocent III and Otto IV. On the other hand, when after Philip's assassination, or Philip was assassinated, Otto IV won recognition in the empire and was also willing to make concessions. Innocent did not hesitate to crown him emperor. Consequently, Innocent was severely disappointed when Otto did not keep his word and in 1210 began to follow the Staufic Sicilian policy. Because of this wrong, Innocent disputed Otto's right to the crown and set against him the now adult Frederick II. So the rightful heir is now an adult. So what the Pope did was to set against the what he didn't want, emperor that he didn't want, so that he will be out of the out of the throne. So previously, Innocent had obtained a sworn oath from Frederick that he would never attempt to unite Sicily with the German crown. No, because of this, Innocent III was have faith in Frederick II. What caused Innocent to be concerned with the lower Italian policy of the German emperor? The problem was not a purely territorial one, but rather one which affected the whole church and was, therefore, universal. The unification of Sicily with the German Empire would, of necessity, have made the Pope nothing but a subordinate imperial bishop, and would have taken from the Pope the independence from the universal empire. The typically Western dualism would have been lost. An Innocent believed that only if the independence and sovereignty of the church state provided the requisite freedom could the papacy fulfill its universal function. The papal leadership. However, Innocent also had his own concept of proper structure of the European world. Because of the preeminence of the spiritual over the secular, because of the states should be combined in a higher order under papal leadership. The idea of papal liege lordship over the Christian peoples of the West correspond with the medieval feudal thought. There was no question of establishing a hierarchy. The, the Christianitas, whose head was the Pope, was not to be a state. It was not at all a real societas, or it was not a real society, but that relationship to the papacy, to the Christian world which seemed to be appropriate to the age. Therefore, the sovereignty of the secular rulers within this order was not all excluded, and the papal claim to leadership was only an indirect character. Papal leadership then merely demanded the acknowledgement of the supreme norms of the Christian faith and of the authority of the papacy. In this way, dualism was preserved. the papal liege lordship. The papal liege lordship is the kingdom will recognize the pope as their lord, or as higher than them. Systematically, Innocent work on the structure of papal liege lordship. The beginning had been made with the contested Sicily, and already in 1198, Empress Constance recognized the Pope as liege lord. And then, in following years, the kings of England, Aragon, Portugal, Denmark, Poland, Bohemia, Hungary, Dalmatia, and other smaller territories accepted their countries from the Pope as fiefs. Also, they recognize the Pope as higher than them. The, pre- the preservation of law and peace, the traditional duties of the emperor, therewith passed to the papacy, and a papal system of vassalage developed, which was constructed entirely on the strong moral authority of the Pope. So Innocent decisively established papal primacy in the internal affairs in the church by intervening energetically in an uncanonical episcopal elections, and by reserving the so-called causae maiores for the curia in Rome. Reforms of papal administrative offices, the monasticism, and of the clergy also helped to enforce good order. So, as what I have mentioned earlier, the Pope Innocent III wants the good order. By the authority of the papal office, nor the officio, ex officio, the Pope proceeded against unworthy prelates and bishops, and had them cited before his inquisitional court. So back then, when the kings are the one to elect their bishops, it is sometimes the office of the bishop sometimes will be given to the uh, uh, family of the king, even though they are not rightful to become bishop, but because they have connections between the uh, royal, so they will become bishops. And Pope Innocent did not want this. So what he did was he cited them before his inquisitional court. At first, Innocent was mild and lenient with heretics. He was mild with heretics. But when his peaceful attempts at conversion failed, and his legate, the Cistercian Peter of Castelnau, was murdered by the Cathari in southern France. So Cathari is a Christian sect. The Pope does not recognize them as the as a within the church. So the church recognized them as the as a heretic. So when his legate, or his papal legate, was killed, he organized a crusade against Cathari and all the heretics and all the heresies in 1209. However, he was not responsible for the terrible and shameful sanguine course of this enterprise. The blame rests above all on the fanatical papal legate Arnaldus Amalrici, and on Count Simon of Montfort. Also, this man is the papal legate, or the Cistercian Peter of Castelnau. This picture here in the right side are the Cathari being driven out with the church. I mean, of the church. Innocent and poverty. It stands in honor to Innocent the Third in the annals of his pontificate that he correctly evaluated the appeals and the significance of poverty movement in the church. He gave a special concern to the Lombardic Humiliati, and he also founded the Alliance of the Poor Catholics. But most far-reaching was his kind reception of Francis of Assisi, who had came to Rome in 1209 or 1210 to request papal authorization for his small society, as we now call the Franciscans or the Order of Friar Minors. And the mendicants' orders soon became the strongest supporters of the church. So, wala nagmahay ang si Pope Innocent III because the mendicants' order was one of the strongest, or perhaps the strongest, supporters of the church. In spite all of his power, Innocent had something in common with those orders, and that he always maintained an inner distance from wealth and pomp and never felt its addiction. He is powerful, he is influential pope, the most powerful and influential pope in the modern history, I mean the in the medieval ages, because of his uh, moderateness. He did not become an addict of wealth, although he uh, became a supporter of poverty. No? Innocent the Third and the Fourth Lateran Council. The high point of Innocent's pontificate was the Fourth Lateran Council, so he organized the Fourth Lateran Council, which he assembled in 1215, and which was attended in about 500 bishops and 800 abbots. Not only was this council an imposing review of the whole Christian West, but is also constituted an unparalleled peak of ecclesiastical life during the zenith of the Middle Ages. Its reform decrees contributed much to the internal rejuvenation and the consolidation of the Church and were long effective in provincial councils and diocesan synods. The definition of the doctrines of transubstantiation, the, the bread being the body of Christ during the consecration, and the ordinances regarding obligatory annual confessions and communion at Easter were of lasting permanence, but not now. After the Fourth Lateran Council, the it is obligatory to have confession and to have communion on Easter at Easter, because back then the laity can only receive communion on Easter, but Pope Pius X changed that. He wants the faithful to receive communion every day to be pious. So, the high point to turning point. Unfortunately, this high point also became a turning point. Innocent died soon after the council on July 16, 1216, and his successors were unable to maintain the position which he had achieved from the papacy, primarily because the papacy was burdened with such heavy political mortgage. So his successors are naglisod to maintain the power which Innocent III constructed during his papacy. Now, the world domination, after all, can never be the task of the church, even though it must always be concerned that the life of the states is conducted according to the religious and moral principles of Christianity. Religion suffers when it is amalgamated with politics, and the pontifical office loses prestige of if it is employed for worldly as well as spiritual aims. With the successors of Innocent III, the high ideals of universal church receded more and more into the background, and in the High Middle Ages, the Renaissance and the Reformation, territorial and political problems, and the maintenance and enlargement of the papal states often outweighed the general ecclesiastical concerns. Also, the death of Innocent III and the lack of power of his successors results to the High Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the Reformation. The last battle between Frederick III and the popes. However, in the last great decisive battle between Regnum and Sacerdotum, or between Emper- Em- Emperor Frederick II and the popes, the issue was still the question which of the two great universal power has precedence. When the young emperor revived the Staufic policy on Sicily and of going on crusade as he promised, became totally enmeshed in the plans for southern Italy, which constituted a threat to the papal states. Gregory the Ninth excommunicated him in 1228. While under the ban, Frederick undertook the crusade. Even though he was excommunicated for not going into crusade, he undertook the crusade because he was married with his wife, that is Queen of the Jerusalem, and then he, as the uh, emperor, rightful emperor of Jerusalem, he undertook the crusade to claim his kingdom, and was successful in obtaining the succession of the Holy Land to the Christians by treaties with Sultan al-Kamil. In 1230, Gregory lifted the ban, but soon the real differences over the imperial policy of the unification of Sicily, with the supreme and entire concomitant encirclement of the papal states by the empire, came to the fore again. Frederick was excommunicated again. So this is the second time Frederick II was excommunicated. And from Naples he advanced against Rome. It was Frederick's goal to capture the city and make it his residence for a universal empire. So when Frederick II advanced in Rome, he kidnapped almost all the bishops of Rome, and except the Pope. It was Frederick's goal to capture the city and to make his residence for a universal empire. That would have meant the irreversible end of the universal papacy, which would have sunk to the position of a common imperial episcopate. This, then, was a matter of life and death for the papacy. It was a threat to the papacy. Innocent IV in 1243 to 1254 recognized the danger, and the fight which was carried on during the following years was extremely bitter on both sides. At the First Council of Lyons, Frederick was once more excommunicated. So this is the third time Frederick was excommunicated. A flood of polemic pamphlets supported the war, It even became more clearly evident that the fundamental question was one concerning the order of the Western world. In order to escape the danger of Staufic encirclement, the innocent transferred lower. So take note that this is Innocent the Fourth, not Innocent the Third. So Innocent transferred Lower Italy, Sicily, and the Naples as papal fiefs to Charles of Anjou. So Frederick II's death. After Frederick's death in 1250, the empire was again in terrible crisis, and in German elections and counter-elections disturbed the peace. Conrad IV fought in Italy for the maintenance of his Staufen heritage, and when he died at the age of 26, his half-brother Manfred attempted to retain the crown for Conrad's two-year-old son, Conradin. After Manfred's death, the youthful Conradin courageously set out in the fall of 1267 to regain his lower Italian empire. Near Tagliacozzo, Conradin was defeated by Charles of Anjou, and together with 12 companions was beheaded in Naples on October 29, 1268. The Staufic dynasty had come to a tragic end, and the imperial power had been cruelly destroyed. Also, uh, the Staufen Empire was defeated by the papacy, although the papacy defeated them in great cost. So, from left to right, the first picture in the left is Pope Innocent the Fourth. The second one is the Anjou, uh, Philip. Charles of Anjou. The third uh, picture to the right is Conrad. Conradin. The fourth last picture in the right is Conrad the Fourth. Papacy after the battle. The papacy also had been most severely damaged. It had won a Pyrrhic victory and could no longer maintain its universal position. It was not able to withstand the special interest of the rising national states, and the dissolution of the Western community proceeded rapidly. France now became the strongest power in Europe. The time was not far when the papacy would be relieved of its newly attained predominant position by the national French monarchy and would fall into humiliating dependence on France. The papacy of Boniface the The attempt by Pope Boniface VIII once more to assert the papal claim to leadership in a completely changed world appears like a strange anachronism. An authoritative personality with an exaggerated awareness of power, but without religious depth and a sense of the realities of life, Boniface dreamed the erection of a universal theocratic Western state under papal leadership. He ignored completely the inordinately great damage which the prestige of the papacy had suffered in its struggle for power with the empire. A portentous battle ensued when Boniface tried to enforce a spiritual and political position of preeminence for the papacy against Philip the Fair of France. who himself had planned for the establishment of French world domination, which the bull Linum Sanctam, which relied on the doctrine of the two swords, according to which Christ in Luke chapter 2, verse 38, had given to the church with both powers, the spiritual and the secular, and declared obedience to the Pope a necessity for salvation. Boniface expected to achieve his goal. Philip answered the papal ban by appealing to a council against Boniface and had the Pope arrested by a handful of soldiers in the papal palace of Anagni in September 1308. Even though the citizens of Anagni liberated the Pope after only 2 days, this violent action revealed the complete lack of power and political insignificance of the papacy. The Pope was helpless to defend himself, and he did not long survive the collapse of his dreams of world domination. Only a few weeks later, Boniface died in Rome. With the death of Boniface VIII, the universal medieval position of preeminence of the papacy irrevocably came to an end. So, as we can see, as we can realize when we see the church history, everything that happens to the church, the way laming panghitabo that happens in the church, it will always include Germany. Here, the battle between papacy and the Staufen Empire. No, Germany was still the against the church. During the Reformation, also, Martin Luther was German. He put an destruction within the church. So that's it for my uh, reporting. I hope you learned something, and thank you for listening.